Hey guys, welcome to On the Stack, presented to you by Kimber's Edge and GETV. And I'm Victor, with my boy Tony. And today, we're not going to really cover some of the stuff with Standard, what's actually happening in Standard actively and currently. We're going to actually just, because it's kind of like a stale week, so we actually decided this week we're going to take our time to give some tips and tricks to some of the newer players who want to play competitive Standard. Because there's a lot of things that people do when they first start playing that ultimately they're going to learn that like they shouldn't do this and they're wasting your time, and we're saving you time. Listen to our tips and tricks. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some of the important points of excelling in the competitive scene, and maybe save you some time and have some real testing time.
And these aren't unique to new players. Like I feel a lot of the players sometimes forget these facts, and especially after some standards we've had where there's one deck to win, one deck to rule them all. We now have
a bunch
possible
of them.
chances. And the most important thing is there's very rarely in Magic in history is there one best deck. There's usually tier 1 decks, and it's based on the pilot. So this is kind of just going to go over how to make you a better pilot of the decks.
Yeah. So one of the things that some of the players assume is that just because you're playing what's considered a good deck, you're going to win with the deck. And this is the kind of thing where I kind of frown upon new players just doing something called net decking, like going online and like copying and pasting a deck. Realistically, what you want to do is okay.
Water.
Producers want us to be well quenched, I guess.
It's because we got ashy lips.
Probably. So, yeah, buddy. So, one of the things that a lot of people do is they kind of just copy and paste these net decks that have been like either in first place in Opens, first place in GPs and some of the other stuff and Pro Tours, and they kind of think that they're going to be able to put this deck together and win. And that's just a false conception, to be completely honest, because you don't know the deck, and that's one of our first points is you should know your deck.
That's FNM hero status. Like, if you see a deck that you're interested in, and you're like, oh wow, I just watched someone I know or the name I've heard of beat someone on Twitch with this deck, and here's the list readily available. If I copy this, I'm going to crush at FNM. You very well might. Sometimes a deck requires absolutely no skill, but at the same time, what happens when you run into the exact same deck with someone who got testing against it?
Yeah.
You thought mono blue control was really good, and then you have someone who has mono blue control and knows how to play the mirror match
better, or knows how to play the deck better, and that's really what it comes down to is you have to know your deck. So if you want a net deck, which obviously I don't care. You do whatever you like. It doesn't matter, because even I sometimes
after the first or second week of the standard, you have to net deck to
an extent. You have to know, not really, but yes, like to make it easier for you, you have to know the core and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, know your deck. You have to invest time in playing your deck. You have to invest time, knowing your ins and outs of your deck. Your deck's not a 60-card deck. Your deck is 75 cards. You have 15 cards in your sideboard. So even if you know the core of the deck, sometimes people forget certain things. Like 2/3 of your matches, if not 50% of your matches, are sideboard. So they know the main board, but they don't know anything about the sideboard. And when sideboard comes in, even though it should be an easy matchup, they lose because they don't know how to sideboard properly. And that's another thing where, people don't think about when they're new. It's not just about copy and paste and just doing whatever. And, you got to know your deck. You have to put the time in. You got to know the ins and outs. You got to see certain interactions that some other players don't realize or don't notice. And that will give you the edge against even the mirror or some more competitive decks. And that's the difference between you and the next guy.
And the trap a lot of people get in, especially when they net deck, is they'll get like a stock idea of what their sideboarding is supposed to be. But a sideboard strategy, it's not a plan, it's kind of like a guideline. Like, you know why you have cards in your sideboard after you test. You don't know why your opponent had cards in his sideboard. Maybe your opponent was overly fearing an Aetherwing, so he put in a couple more Pithing Needles than he thought he would need.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the only card he felt he could lose to. Maybe you have no problem dealing with Aetherwing because the way you play, you hold up counter spells on the critical turns or anything along those lines.
It also depends on your play style.
Or you're going to aggro them out, yeah. So the sideboard and all this testing is really important because you want to make sure that you know how you're going to sideboard, and in case you're given a weird situation where you're playing a deck that's not exactly what you thought it might be, you can kind of change your sideboard plans or go, I saw this, and this card in my sideboard happens to fit the bill of deals with this problem.
Yeah.
And that's something you can only get in testing.
And it all comes down to, it comes down to not being narrow-minded. You have to, at the end of the day, decks evolve. And just because it won last weekend, it doesn't mean it's going to win forever. It doesn't work that way. Especially now in the current standard, like, it's a little bit healthier. So the variation of decks are a little bit more than what we used to play, like when it was like Callblade and that's all you saw, and like crazy shit like that. But now you have these variations, and at the end of the day, decks are going to change, decks are going to evolve. There's like next level versions of decks. There's decks that sacrifice some of the main deck versus some of the other competitive decks to beat the mirrors and stuff like that. And that all comes down to not being narrow-minded and having an open mind to which direction you should take your deck. It's not a win-all. That's just the truth. That doesn't really exist. And with that, you have to also understand there are matches you're going to lose. It's just going to happen. There's certain decks that, at the end of the day, it's rock, paper, scissors. You're the paper, and they're the rock, so you beat them, and then there's someone else who comes around, he's scissors, and he chops you up, and then you just kind of cry a little bit. It is what it is. Yeah, can't be butthurt. But, like, at the end of the day, you can't be discouraged. As I said, new players sometimes get discouraged. They come in and, like, they want to play this deck. And, oh, this is super competitive. Ha, 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 ha. And then they kind of get their shit pushed in prison style, and they go cry to their mama, don't want to play Magic anymore. And she's like, dude, like, time to man up, bro. If you're serious about this, like, you got to stay on task. You got to be on point. You got to invest your time. Some of these people that are pros, they don't just wake up and roll over and be like, oh, look, I'm a pro. Ha. Like, these people, some of these guys we know, they invest their time. They put hours into testing. They put hours into, like, researching the meta and looking their decks and seeing which one they want to play. And if you want to be competitive, you got to earn yours. You got to do the same. You can't just literally wake up and just because you think that some guy, up in New York City did the job for you, you can pick it up and win just like he did with zero testing. That's just false. That's not how that works. That's not realistic. It's a misconception. So we don't want you doing that because then you're just wasting your time. And again, like you're not play testing, and then where are you going to go? So at the end of the day, that's something you should take care of. Is that.
To get a little bit more detail on the topic of playtesting, it kind of gets a little confusing for some people, especially new players. Playtesting isn't taking your deck and playing against your friend's precon, or say you're not net decking. Say you've come up with an idea. You found a card you think is really good in current standard, or you found a way to deal with a specific deck. Like, say you can absolutely positively guarantee that the series of cards you have work very well against mono black control. That's great and wonderful. Testing against your opponent's Grixis control deck is probably not going to help you. When you test, you want to make sure that you have relevant testing before you have rogue testing. You want to make sure that...
You want to play test against the meta. Yeah.
You want to play against the decks you know you'll see. Then, if you have free time and you're not sick of testing, by all means, play against another brew, someone else's brew.
Maybe you'll come up with something interesting.
At the same time, you should have a play test group. And it's kind of unrealistic to imagine that you would have access to every possible card in all of the decks. It's unrealistic, especially because you're a new player. If you're happening to be able to get them all,
and your friends are new too, so it's kind of hard.
That's great and wonderful. No one has that much money when you're starting Magic, or maybe you just don't want to jump headfirst into that commitment. Proxy a deck.
Proxy is okay.
You watch Star City videos, you watch all the videos, they will sit there and they will say, these cards haven't come out yet, but we're going to test with them. Here's a Heliod written on the back of a piece of paper. Go for it. The worst, you know what, on top of it, when you proxy a deck out first, you learn more about what the card does because you're forced to have to remember what it does.
Instead of having to read it every time it comes up,
or instead of just assuming, oh, I didn't know that Rapid Hybridization gave them a 3/3, you would have read that and it would have come up because of the testing and because you wrote it down 4 times maybe, and you drew it and you had to make sure that this white card was different than the other ones and why.
Yeah, and you had to read it.
There you go.
Read it thoroughly.
So you want to make sure that you have a playtesting group. You want to make sure that you have copies or versions of all the meta decks built, and you want to make sure that when you test whatever deck it is, you test against the meta. Yeah. You can test against other decks, that's great and wonderful, but you're not going to get valuable experience unless you know how your deck is going to fare against XYZ. Yeah. Also, changing your deck. If you're like, my deck was really good against mono blue, but not so good against mono black, so I'm going to make this change. You now have to go back and test against mono blue again because your deck's different.
Yeah, because you're different. It's not a vacuum. It's not like, well, in this situation, it's amazing, and in this one situation, it's quite amazing, and then in another situation, like, oh, well, the previous situation, I don't have to deal with it. Well, you change certain things, and you can't think in a vacuum. You can't think, you got to think outside the box. You gotta realize that whenever you make a change, even a simple card, you have to kind of go through it again to kind of confirm whatever your previous assumption was or testing was is still true and still valid. Which is sometimes what a lot of other people do that they don't. It's not enough testing. At the end of the day, that's some people think they're doing enough testing and they're not. Like you change one card, oh, so much better against aggro now, and then like, so I can be control and I can be aggro, ha ha ha, and then you go back and you're getting, and you get murked by control. Yeah, like you lost it. You sacrificed your play matches against control to kind of be aggro. And sometimes that's okay, because there are a lot of decks that, they're not exactly the best decks in the world, but they did well because of the situation they were in.
Or if you're going to a tournament and you know what 90% of the people are playing and you want to make that change.
That last minute change, that's fine.
But that all comes from testing.
Yeah, it comes from testing.
The keynote for all new players is test.
Practice.
There's other things.
Practice. Like, I mean, there's nothing else I can tell you. Like, if I could tattoo it on your forehead, if I could tattoo it on your forehead, so every single time you woke up in the mirror and you like in the morning, you look at the mirror and you saw practice on your forehead, you're like, oh shit, yeah, practice.
And like, fish bowling is not practice. You can't just put your deck out and go, yeah, this hand would be absolutely
great. It's not like masturbation where you have single time and then all of a sudden it's a good time anyway.
Unless you're playing a combo deck.
Doesn't work that way.
Where you don't care.
And still, even then, you have to interact with your opponent. You have to know where you're going to, like, you have to expect certain things. What if they have a Force of Will? What if they have a counterspell? What if they have, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You have to put your time in. You have to play test. You got to practice. It is what it is, to improve.
How do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Study like a motherfucker.
Practice. It's not funny.
Or you be a super genius. Cheating mother. But, okay, so, again, practice is something important. Another thing that I see a lot of people do that I kind of don't like sometimes.
Are we gonna say it? Switch decks?
Okay.
Are we not going to get there yet?
Switching
That's my
decks.
pet peeve.
The switching decks kind of thing. Yeah, you know what? We can kind of go into that. Like, switching decks a little too often. Just because it didn't do good this weekend. You dump a deck and you start over, and then literally you kind of wasted your time because you have to put the deck together, or even if it's just proxying it. Then you have to playtest the new deck. Then you have to go through this whole process that you already invested into the previous deck. And then if that deck doesn't win that weekend, then you change your deck again. Then you have to proxy the deck up again. And then when you want to take it for the tournament, you have to put it together. So you're investing your money, financially.
When someone changes a deck that many times, it means one of two things generally. One, they didn't have enough testing, practice, with the deck the first time around, and they got beat by a deck, and then they went, well, that deck beats this deck, so it's clearly the best. Or,
not necessarily true.
Or, option two, they did have testing, or they had some amount of adequate testing, and they went into a matchup, and they lost to that matchup, and they became a whiny little bitch woman, and decided that the best thing that they can do is cry and moan and change decks because things didn't work out for them. I'm going to tell you this right now. The first deck I played in competitive, not in my friend's basement Magic, at an F&M at the Wizards of the Coast store in the Willowbrook Mall, was a double precon deck I built and put together during the Judgment block based on Phantoms. This deck sucked on ice. I came in second place. I'm not touting. I think everyone else just sucked, or I got paired very well on that time.
That actually matters too. Like depending on you play.
Psychotog was around at this time, and I won with this Phantom deck because the guy just he was like, "This deck is shit," and I was like, "I remember. It was a long time ago, but I still remember his face when he's like, "This deck is shit," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know. So why are you losing?" I spent $20 on my deck. Like, how much was yours?
Yeah, exactly.
And I didn't know. I was young. I was like maybe 12 or something. When I finally was like, oh, gee, I get to play real Magic. No. But then a couple kids came up to me and said, hey, your deck sucks. I'm like, oh, yeah. So here's how to make it better. Oh, that's helpful. And basically, how to make it better was throw them out and get real cards and learn to play. But because of them and because of that experience, I'm a decent player now, and I now know to test. That's what it is. You get a group of friends. Magic's got a community of people who want to help. Just test with them. Get people there. People will test with you. People will just play with you.
Final note time, I think, right?
Yeah, sure.
So one of the other things that, real quick, I just want to touch base, and I feel it's important, is your attitude.
Yes.
And that touches base on what he was saying. It's your attitude.
One little bitch woman.
You invest time. I understand that you're going to be upset, and that's human and normal. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's all about your attitude. And just because, let's say, your opponent beat you in the first match, doesn't mean you're just going to lose. That's called going on tilt. And if you don't know what that means, look it up. And sometimes you could have been in your entire life, but you'd be on tilt and you have no idea. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be discouraged. You don't want to be played on tilt. That's terrible. And we're not talking like this, like tilt. Oh, hey. No, we're not talking about it. We're talking about your mental.
One-land hands don't draw in. Shit happens.
Go on tilt,
Life
and you're
sucks.
like, whatever. It happens. This is life, and not everything's Christmas land and fairy tales. It's
chalk
reality.
it up, move on.
Shit happens. It is what it is, and maybe in the next one you'll do better. It is what it is. And sportsmanship is really important as well, because no one likes playing with the guy who's got an ill attitude, or is a sore loser, or what is it? He just talks a lot of shit when they win. I mean, at the end of the day, just keep him out. Just being a dickhead. Just don't be a dickhead. Don't be a douche. And people want to play with you, and people want to play test with you, and you'll improve.
Magic is 3 parts: 33% deck, 33% skill, 33% luck. You can only control 66% of that.
Yeah.
You can only control your skill and the deck. You pick the right deck and you practice with it. You'll remove the mistakes you make, which will increase your skill, and then the luck you have no control over.
You have no luck.
You draw the right cards.
And then
make your 66% chance to win a game. You're better off than anyone else.
Than most people. Yeah, it's true.
Yep.
So that's about what we got for today, and hopefully we'll next time we see you or next time you see us, you've improved and been better players, and hope you had a good time. As I said, this is On the Stack, presented to you by GETV and Gamers Edge. I'm Victor. This is Tony. Hope you enjoyed yourself.